And then the segmental are going to get even smaller, and the walls of these tubes are going to change a little bit. So the trachea has those tracheal rings, if you remember, and once you bifurcate and start getting into the bronchi, um, the tracheal rings are going to start kind of getting more flat, and at that point they're just called plates, but they're still surrounding the walls of the bronchi. And the smaller that we get, the we're eventually going to lose that uh, cartilage plate or ring, and the muscular wall is going to get a little bit thicker. So that allows us to have a little bit more control over how dilated our bronchioles are. So a bronchiole is basically the end of a bronchi. So the bronchi gets smaller, loses the cartilage plates, and at that point we are in a bronchiole with a thick, smooth muscular wall. And the bronchioles are going to get even smaller to what is called a terminal bronchiole. And then even smaller than that is where the respiratory bronchioles are. So if we're following the pattern over here, so this is the left lung. So the left main bronchi, the two secondary bronchi, and then the multiple tertiary bronchi. And then we're going to get smaller into a bronchiole and eventually into the terminal bronchiole and then into the pulmonary respiratory bronchiole. So at that point, the inside wall of the bronchiole is changing. So we started as the pseudostratified columnar epithelium, and it's going to transition as we travel down the tube to eventually be just the simple squamous epithelium in these sacs down here. So between the respiratory bronchiole and these alveolar sacs here, we're going to have these little ducts. So oops, let me turn on my brush here. So this little segment right here is called the alveolar duct, and it connects the respiratory bronchiole here to the alveolar sacs. And you can think of these pockets in the lungs, and there's obviously more than just this one track. We have a few 100 million alveoli in our lungs, and they're kind of like if you bought the grapes at the store. So there's a main vine, and then there's smaller vines that give way to clusters of grapes. So one cluster of grapes here would be called an alveolar sac. And then each individual grape would be an alveoli. And at this point, again, the alveoli are basically just simple squamous epithelium. So oxygen can pass easily from the alveoli through the wall, through the capillary bed wall, and into the capillary system. And then carbon dioxide can go in the opposite direction and it collects in the alveoli, and then we breathe it out. So the capillary beds here, it's coming off of a branch of the pulmonary artery. So if you remember, the pulmonary artery was blue. It's going to travel alongside the bronchi into the bronchioles, and it's going to get smaller and send off branches into what are called the arterioles. And then at that point, we are in the pulmonary capillary bed. So then oxygen is going to come into the capillary system, carbon dioxide and water are actually going to leave the system. And those capillary beds are going to get a little bit bigger into what are called the pulmonary venules. You can see the pulmonary venule right there. And then those pulmonary venules are going to dump into the pulmonary veins, which will then end up in those four main pulmonary veins that end up in the left atrium. So here is a model of the alveolar sacs. And so you can see basically everything you saw in that other picture. So this little section is an alveolar sac. This is showing you where the alveolar duct is. This is a respiratory bronchiole and a terminal bronchiole here. And each of these individual sacs are the alveoli, and then the capillary beds, the pulmonary artery, and the pulmonary vein.